But Ustad Abhi Kamra mein kuch hoya ho to bula lo unko. Yaqub, call everyone from the other rooms as well.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. The benefits of chastity. Continuing the benefits of chastity. Number 4, acceptance of du'as. Once the city of Delhi was afflicted by a severe drought, all of the ulama gathered in an open field to pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for rain. Many men, women and children accompanied them, and their animals were taken along as well. From the early morning until Asr, they stood out in the burning sun and prayed, "O Allah, we are in a drought, please send us rain through your mercy." But there was no sign of rain. A young man was passing by and saw the huge gathering. He stopped his conveyance and asked, Why have you people gathered here?" They replied, "We have been here since early morning praying for rain. We have cried and begged Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even the little children have been calling out in desperation. The entire day has passed like this, but the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not yet descended upon us." The young man remarked, "I see. Allow me a few minutes to pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well." He proceeded to his conveyance, where he began to pray. Immediately the clouds gathered and it began to rain. The ulama were astonished and hastened towards him to find out who he was. He was undoubtedly a mustajabud da'wat, meaning a person whose prayers are readily accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They asked the young man, "Please advise what prayer you made." The young man replied, "My mother is seated on this conveyance. She is such a pure and chaste woman that no strange man has ever seen her, and vice versa. I took hold of a corner of her garment and prayed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, 'O Allah, I am the son of this pure woman. If her chastity holds any status in your sight, please send down the rain to your servants.' Due to this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down the rain." Number 5, getting something better in return. It is reported from Abu Qatada and Abu Dahma, who said, "We came to a man from the people of the desert and asked him, 'Did you hear a hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam?' He replied, 'I heard him saying, you will never leave something for the sake of Allah, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you something better in return." Narrated by Imam Ahmad. This is the system of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The incident of Yusuf alayhi salam was mentioned above. He sacrificed his mundane desires for some period. In return, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted him kingdom and honor in this world, as well as the highest of the stages in the hereafter. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted us sufficient halal, lawful avenues to the extent that we do not need to resort to the haram, the prohibited. Many a person who abstains from haram out of fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is blessed with halal through the sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The time span between committing the haram action and the halal action was only a short while. How truthful the words of Shaykh Ibn Ata'illah al-Iskandari rahimahullah when he says, "Our sustainer is far beyond this, that the servant treats him on a cash basis while he rewards him on a credit basis." Read these strange incidents so that you may witness therein the recompense of the grand sustainer. Number 1, a pious student was once our sustainer is far beyond this that the servant treats him on a cash basis while he rewards him on a credit basis. Number 1, a pious student was once studying in Delhi and would sleep in a nearby masjid. One night, a young woman was on her way to visit some of her relatives who resided in the area when a riot broke out. She could not manage to escape the commotion and violence in time and quickly ran into the masjid in fear of her life. When the student noticed her, he was alarmed and explained that the masjid was not an appropriate place for her to hide. "People may notice us here, and my honor will be tarnished. They will then evict me from the masjid to the detriment of my studies," he pleaded. She explained, "If I leave the safety of this masjid, I fear that my honor and dignity may be blemished by the rioting mobs out in the street." Her explanation silenced him, and he realized the gravity of her situation. He directed her to a corner of the masjid where she could remain seated and return to continue with his studies. He was immersed in his books for the duration of the night, but occasionally he would place his finger in the flame of a lamp that he was using as a source of light. The young woman too remained awake and intently watched the young man. Close to dawn, he said to her, "The rioters have dispersed and the streets appear to be safe. I am prepared to accompany you to ensure that you reach your home safely." But she remarked, "I will not leave this masjid until you explain to me why you kept placing your finger in the flame throughout the night." He replied, "This is a private matter and I would request you not question me further about it." But the young woman would not give in. When he realized that he could not convince her otherwise, he explained, "Shaitan was continuously enticing me to fulfill my desires with you. Hence, I kept placing my finger in the flame to remind myself of the unbearable intensity of the fire of Jahannam. If I could not bear the negligible burns from the worldly flame, how would I ever bear the torment of the fire of Jahannam? I am so grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He saved me from sin throughout the night." The young woman left and reached her home safely. She was from a wealthy family and was soon to be married to a family relative. She immediately declined the offer to marry him and said to her parents, "My desire is to marry the student from the masjid." Her parents and family tried their utmost to convince her to see things their way, but to no avail. Others began harboring suspicions regarding her. When she heard their remarks, she explained what had transpired on that fateful night and concluded, "The student has the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala within his heart, and such a man will never harm or inconvenience others. My desire is to marry him." Eventually, her family consented and the marriage was performed. The student who had lived in a masjid now became the owner of his very own home due to his fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number 2. Hazrat Hassan Basri rahmatullahi alayhi narrates, there was a fornicating woman of unparalleled beauty in her area, and she would not let any man sleep with her unless he paid her 100 dinars. One day a man saw her and was attracted to her. So he went away and worked so hard that he managed to earn 100 dinars and came back to her. She told him, "Pay it to the man at the door so that he may count it and weigh it." When he did this, she told him to enter. She had a luxurious home and a bed made of gold. She told him, "Come to me." When he was about to have intercourse with her, he suddenly remembered his standing before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of resurrection. Then it was as though he was struck with lightning and his desire was utterly extinguished. He said to her, "Allow me to leave you and you can keep the money." She replied, "How can you do this now when you saw me and was attracted to me and went and worked hard to collect the 100 dinars, and when you are finally with me, you do what you did?" He said, "By Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I did not do this out of anything except for the fear of Allah and the thought of my standing between His hands." She said, "If you are truthful in what you say, then I want to marry nobody except you." He replied, "Let me leave." She said, "No, not until you promise to marry me." He said, "I cannot do anything until I leave first." She then said to him, "You must promise to Allah that if I come to where you live, then you will marry me." He said, "It might be so, we will see." So he put on his clothes, left her and traveled back to his land. She later traveled to his land with all that she owned, regretting the circumstances under which they had met each other, until she arrived and asked about him. When she arrived at his home, it was said to him, "The queen herself has arrived and asked about you." When he saw her, he was in such a state of shock that he collapsed and died. His body fell into her arms and she said, "As for him, then I have missed out on the chance to be with him. Does he have any close relatives?" It was said to her, "Yes, his brother, but he is a poor man." She said to him, "I will marry you out of love for your dead brother." She married him and bore him 7 righteous sons. Number 3. There was once a pious person from amongst Bani Israel who was extremely handsome. He used to make baskets by the door of the king with his baskets. The slave of the queen was standing at the door, and she immediately, upon seeing such a handsome man, ran to the queen and informed her that the most handsome man she had ever seen is at the door selling baskets. The queen immediately instructed him to come in, expressing her desire to purchase baskets. The poor fellow innocently entered her palace. What did he know of the events that were about to occur? Seeing him, the queen was overtaken by his beauty. She said to him, "Why are you roaming around selling baskets? Leave those baskets down on the floor and cover yourself with this quilt." She then commanded the servants, "Bring the aromatic oils and the fragrant perfume, so that I can please myself with him and he can please himself with me." She then turned to him saying, "Remain here and you will not have to sell these baskets ever again." He refused, picked up his baskets and started walking away. The queen said, "Even if you refuse, you can't leave till you do become intimate with me. All of the doors are locked. Where are you going?" He pleaded with her to let go of him, but in vain. He then said to her, "Grant me a few minutes of leave so that I may go upstairs." Feeling that nothing was wrong with this request, she thus agreed. He asked for a container of water to be taken upstairs for him, and he himself climbed the steps. It is possible that he took the water to make wudu. He went up and searched hither thither for an escape route or something which he could use to climb down from the building, but eventually, dejected on not finding anything to help him, he solemnly sat down in one corner and began speaking to himself. O my nafs, for 70 years you have tried to please your Rabb day and night. Such a night has come to you which will destroy all of that. Tonight your examination is being taken. Be aware that if you are unfaithful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the slightest manner tonight, then all of your good deeds will be laid to waste. Pleasure is short-lived, but the punishment of the hereafter is everlasting. And then in the hereafter, how will you ever face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with only these evil actions? He continued warning himself until he got the better of his nafs. Lastly, he mustered enough courage to jump from the window. As he leapt out of the window, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Jibreel alayhi salam to assist, saying, O Jibreel, my slave is ready to kill himself just to save himself from my displeasure and disobedience. Catch him with your wing and make sure he is not harmed in the least. Like a compassionate father taking his child into his arms, Jibreel alayhi salam lowered him to the ground. He rushed back home, leaving the baskets behind him in the palace. It was already past sunset. His wife was taken aback on seeing his condition. She asked, have you sold all the baskets or not? He replied, I made no money on the baskets today. The wife, out of concern, asked, what will we eat today? He replied, today we will adopt patience for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But you should light the oven so that the neighbors don't come to know of the fact that we have no food and feel sorry for us. The wife lit the fireplace and began listening to all the details of the incident from her husband. A short while later, the neighbor came to ask for firewood. She was told to take it from the fireplace. When she came to the oven, she saw bread baking. She ran back telling them, you are engaged in conversation and the bread in your oven is completely baked. If you delay any longer, it will burn. The wife stood up in fright and went to see. She saw that the oven was full of bread and they ate to their fill. She then said to him, your Allah has only granted you this honor because you are honorable in His eyes. Why don't you make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us prosperity and affluence for the rest of our lives? He asked her to be patient over these minor difficulties, but she insisted. Finally, he consented to her requests. In the last portion of that night, he awoke to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala thus, O Allah, my wife is adamant in her wish, grant her such wealth by which she will be able to live comfortably for the rest of her life. A tray was suddenly seen in the house, carrying a precious jewel which shone so brightly that the entire house lit up in its light. He shook his wife's leg to awaken her and said, get up and take what you are asking for. She replied, wait a minute, did you wake me for that? I just saw in my dream a whole row of golden thrones which were studded with jewels and green emeralds. But there was a gap which looked slightly unsightly, wherein one such jewel was missing. I asked, for whom is this? I heard a reply, this is your husband's sitting room. I asked, why is there a gap here? The reply came, this gap was formed as a result of that which your husband had asked for in advance. I don't want anything which will make your sitting room in Jannah look ugly. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to take it back. He did as she instructed and the tray suddenly disappeared. This virtue is not exclusive to only certain persons. Whoever fears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and safeguards himself from disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so that he is cautious not to be disobedient until his death, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will assist him in a similar way and will render even the impossible possible for him. Number 4. Amir Shuja'uddin Muhammad Shirazi, a state official of Cairo, related, I was with a person in the upper regions of Egypt in an area called Sa'id. He was very hospitable to us and honored us greatly. The person was of dark complexion and was an old man. Some of his children came before us who were very beautiful and of a fair complexion. So we said to him, are these really your children? Yes, he explained. You must be surprised at their fair complexion and my dark complexion. We acknowledged our surprise. He said, the mother of these children is a European. I married her when I was a young man in the days of King al-Nasir, Sultan al-Nasir, Salahuddin, during the Battle of Hittin. We asked, how did you come to marry her? He replied, there is a very strange story with regard to her. We said, tell us about it. He said, I once planted flax in this area, which I harvested and cleaned at the cost of 500 dinars. But I could not find a buyer willing to pay any more than the cost for it. I took it to Cairo and thereafter to Syria, but was still unable to get more for it. Eventually, I took my goods to Akka, where I sold some of the flax on credit for a period of 6 months while I kept some with me. I rented a shop in which I began trading slowly till the expiry of 6 months. While I was busy trading, a European woman who was the wife of one of the soldiers came to me. European women walk about in the marketplaces without any face covering. She came to me in order to purchase flax. I was overwhelmed and astounded by her beauty. I sold her some flax and was very generous to her by selling it at a discounted price. She returned after a few days. I sold her some more flax and was even more generous to her than the first time. She came on several occasions and she realized I was attracted to her. I one day said to the old woman who usually accompanied her, I am madly in love with her. Do you think I could gain access to her? The old woman conveyed this to her. She replied, all of our souls, mine, hers, and yours, are going to leave this world. I said to her, if my soul leaves with her, it is no serious matter. She finally agreed on the condition that I should give her 50 dinars and she would be mine. I counted the 50 dinars and handed them over to the old woman. She said to me, make ready for us at your place and I will spend tonight with you. I went and made whatever preparations I could, food, drinks, lights, sweets, etc. My house overlooked the sea. It was summertime. I therefore laid out a carpet on top of the house. The woman came, we ate and drank till darkness fell, and so we slept beneath the skies while the moon was shining upon us and the stars were reflecting on the ocean. Thereafter came the time for me to fulfill my desires with her. I said to myself, are you not ashamed of yourself? You are away from home, beneath the skies, overlooking the ocean, and yet you have the audacity to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with a Christian woman. You will thus be eligible for the punishment of hell and the punishment of this world as well. I said to myself, O Allah, I make you witness that I have abstained from this Christian woman tonight out of shame from you and fear from your punishment. I then slept till the next morning. The woman got up angrily the next morning and went away. I went to my shop and sat there. Suddenly I saw her passing by me together with the old woman, and she was in an angry mood. She looked like the moon in her beauty. I was immediately overtaken by her beauty and said to myself, who do you think you are that you are leaving this young gorgeous woman without fulfilling your craving? Do you think you are Junaid Baghdadi or Sirri Sakti? I then went to the old woman and said, come back. She replied, by Jesus, we will not come back unless you pay us 100 dinars. I said, okay, I agree. I went back to my shop and counted the dinars. She thus came to me for a second time. The same thoughts came back to me, and I therefore abstained from her solely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. She again left angrily, and I continued to my shop. After some time, she approached me and spoke to me like a stranger. She said, by Jesus, you will never be able to enjoy me except if you pay 500 dinars, or else you can die in grief. I realized that her price was excessive, but I made a firm resolution that I will suffer the loss of my flax and my business and hand myself over to her. While I was thinking about all of this, a person announced, O Muslims, the truce between us and you is now over. We are giving respite till Friday to the Muslims who are here to settle their affairs and return to their lands. The announcement was the point of separation between me and the woman. I began collecting the money for my flax which was owed to me and began making arrangements for the remainder. I took quite a bit of goods with me and left Akka, a seaport in Palestine. My heart was still drowned in the love of that European woman. I reached Damascus and sold the goods at a far higher price because there was a shortage of them after the truce had ended. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed me with a very good profit till I became a prosperous businessman. I then began trading in slave women in the hope that I would forget everything about that woman. I thereafter engrossed myself solely in this business. 3 years had passed in this way. The Battle of Hittin eventually took place, and as Sultan al-Nasir Salahuddin took charge of the kingdom and conquered many lands, including the coastal regions, with the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I was asked by his attendants to send a slave woman to Sultan al-Nasir. I had a very beautiful slave woman whom I sold for 100 dinars. They paid 90 dinars to me in cash and returned to the king to request for the remaining 10 dinars. They did not even have 10 dinars in the treasury on that day because all the money had been spent on other projects elsewhere. The officials therefore consulted with the king in this regard. He instructed, take this person, referring to me, to the treasury where the captives of war are housed. Let him choose one of them in exchange for the 10 dinars which are owed to him. I went to the treasury, looked at the women and recognized the woman who had taken for herself all of that money of mine. I said, give me that one. I took her and proceeded home. In privacy, I asked her, do you know me? She replied, no. I said to her, I am that trader with whom such and such an incident had taken place. You had taken my money and you finally said, you will not be able to see me unless you pay 500 dinars. And now I have taken you as a slave for 10 dinars. She said, extend your hand. I bear witness that there is none worthy of worship except Allah, and that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the messenger of Allah. She thus embraced Islam and became a very good Muslim. I said to myself, by Allah, I will not sleep with her except after marrying her. I went to Ibn Shaddad, the Qadi, and related to him the entire incident. He was astonished and solemnized my marriage to her. She spent that night with me and fell pregnant. I continued with the army and we traveled to Damascus. Within a few months, the messenger of the king arrived with orders asking for all the prisoners and slaves to be returned due to some agreement that had taken place between the Muslim and Christian kings. The men and women captives and slaves were returned. Only my European wife remained with me. The officials asked about her and they persisted in searching for her. Information was given to them that she was with me. They then came to me in search of her. I was asked to present myself before the king and was so frightened that my color had changed. She said to me, what has happened? What has afflicted you? I said, the messenger of the king came and all the male and female captives must be returned. They have now come to ask about you. She replied, there is nothing to worry about. Take me to them. I know what to tell them. I took her and presented her before Sultan al-Nasir Salahuddin Ayyubi with the European messenger sitting on his right. I said, this is the woman who is with me. The king and the messenger said to her, do you want to return to your homeland or remain with your husband? You and the others have been freed. She said to the king, I have already embraced Islam and I have fallen pregnant. Here you can see how big my stomach is. The Europeans can no longer benefit from me. The messenger said to her, who is more beloved to you, this Muslim or your previous husband? She gave the same reply to the messenger. The messenger said to the Europeans who are present, listen to what she has to say. The messenger then said to me, take your wife and you may go. I thus turned around and left with her. The messenger then hastily sent a message to me saying, her mother entrusted me with something for her and said to me, my daughter is imprisoned, she has no clothes and is disheveled. I wish that you send this box to her and hand it over to her. I thus accepted the box and we continued to our house. She then opened the box and found the clothes that her mother had woven for her from the very same flax I had sold to her. She also found 2 heaps of money, the 50 dinars and the 100 dinars which I had given to her. They were exactly as I had given them to her. These are my children from her. She is still living and is the one who prepared the food. Sheikh Abdul Fattah says, it becomes clear from this incident and from the incidents similar to this that the person who abstains from the prohibited for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestows him with a replacement that is lawful. Our sustainer is far beyond than that the servant treats him on a cash basis while he rewards him on a credit basis. Number 2. Respect even after one's demise. Abdul Rahman bin Zayd bin Aslam rahimahullah narrated, Ata and Sulaiman bin Yasar, brothers, went to run an errand outside Medina along with some companions of theirs. When they reached the outskirts of the city, they stopped at a house to rest. Sulaiman and his companions went to attend to some of their needs while Ata stayed in the house alone performing salah. Suddenly a beautiful Bedouin woman appeared in front of him. When Ata saw her, he assumed that she needed something from him. So he sped up his salah a little and then asked her, is there something you need? She answered in the affirmative. He asked her, and what is that? She replied, come and have your share with me, for I am filled with desire and I am without a spouse. So he said to her, get away from me and do not cause me to burn in the fire along with you. She then continued to entice Ata until he started weeping and repeating, woe be to you, get away from me. And his weeping intensified until the woman herself saw his weeping and the grief that was inside him. Then she herself began to weep because of his weeping. While they were both sitting and weeping, his brother Sulaiman returned from seeing to his needs. And when he saw his brother Ata weeping and the woman on the other side of the house weeping, he himself began to weep as a result of their weeping without asking them about anything. When the weeping intensified and grew louder, the woman got up and left the house. Their companions who were standing outside of the house then got up and came in. And Sulaiman remained after that without ever asking his brother about the woman out of respect for him, as he, Sulaiman, was the younger of the two. They then proceeded to Egypt to see to an errand and remained there as long as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed. One night, Ata was sleeping and woke up crying. Sulaiman said to him, "Why are you crying, O brother?" And Ata's weeping intensified, and he said, "Because of a dream that I had tonight." Sulaiman asked him, "And what was it?" Ata said, "Do not inform anyone of it as long as I am alive. I saw Yusuf alayhi salam in my dream. So when I went to look at him along with others who are looking at him, so when I saw his beauty, I wept. He then looked at me out of all the people and said, 'Why are you weeping?' I replied, 'May my father and mother be ransomed for you, O Nabi of Allah. I remembered the wife of Al-Aziz, how you were tested with her, what you experienced during imprisonment and the separation from your father Yaqub alayhi salam. I remembered all of this and wept and was amazed by it all.' So he, Yusuf alayhi salam, said, 'Will you not be then even be more amazed by the one who was with the beautiful Bedouin woman on the outskirts of the city but rejected her?' I realized to whom he was referring, so I wept and woke up weeping. At that point, Sulaiman asked, 'My brother, what is the situation with this woman?' So Ata told him the story, and Sulaiman did not tell anyone else until Ata had passed away. He then informed a woman of their family who later said, 'And this story did not spread in Medina Munawwara except after the death of Sulaiman bin Yasar.' Number 3.
यहाँ पर ये लिखा है, लेकिन मैंने पढ़ा तो ये किस्सा सुलेमान इब्न यसार का है. That Bedouin came to Suleiman, and Suleiman started crying. And then Suleiman ibn Yasar saw Yusuf alayhi salam in dream. And he asked Yusuf alayhi salam, and Yusuf alayhi salam, he said to Yusuf alayhi salam, your story in the Quran about Zulaykha falling in love with you and you abstaining is ajib. And Yusuf alayhi salam said, I am a prophet. You are not a prophet, and your story with the Bedouin is even more ajib. So when you protect yourself, this is how Allah rewards. Seeing Yusuf alayhi salam in dream and giving him basharat, that inshallah you will get good high ranks in Jannah, inshallah.
The third benefit, chastity of family members. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is reported to have said, "Kama tadinu tudan," as you do, so will be done to you. Narrated by Imam Bayhaqi. If a person wants his family members to remain chaste, then he should do likewise. It is the system of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He treats a person in accordance to his actions. Our actions are similar to a boomerang. As it is thrown, it bounces back onto the person that threw it. If good actions are done, good results will ensue. If evil is perpetrated, then the ensuing result is evil. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is reported to have said, "Be chaste, and your women will remain chaste. Be kind to your parents, your children will be kind to you." Narrated by Imam Hakim. Imam Shafi rahimahullah said, "Iffu ta'iffa nisa'ukum fil mahrami, wa tajannabu ma la yaliqu bi muslimi. Inna az-zina daynun fa in aqrastahu kana al-wafa min ahli baytika fa'lami. Man yazni yuzna bihi walau bi jidarihi, in kunta ya hadha labiban fafhami. Man yazni fi qawmin bi alfay dirhami, yuzna fi ahli baytihi bi dirhami." Stay chaste, and your women will be chaste, and save yourself from that which is unfit for a Muslim. Verily, adultery is a debt. If you have taken this debt, know that its payment will be taken from the people of your household. One who commits adultery, in return adultery will be committed with him, even though it will be committed against the wall of your house. O man, if you are wise, then you should know it. Whoever fornicates for 2,000 dirhams in any group of people, adultery will be committed in his family for 1 dirham. Number 4, safety on the Day of Judgment. The Day of Judgment will be extremely difficult. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is reported to have said, "On the Day of Resurrection, the sun will be brought close to the creation to such an extent that it will be 1 mile away from them." Sulaym bin Amir, the person who narrates from Miqdad radiallahu anhu, said, "By Allah, I do not know what he meant by a meal. Did he refer to a measure by which the land is measured, or did he refer to the dipstick which is used to dip in the antimony, which is then applied to the eye, as the word meal also refers to this?" Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam continues, "The people will be submerged in perspiration according to their deeds. There will be those who will be submerged till their ankles, others till their knees, others till their hips, and there will be those whose mouths will be with the perspiration will bridle." Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam demonstrated with his hand to his mouth. The person who protects himself from immorality when he has the opportunity to do so will be amongst the fortunate to be saved from the severities of the Day of Judgment, and he will be honored with the shade under the divine throne. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu narrates that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, there are 7 people to whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will provide shade beneath his shade on a day where there will be no shade except the shade provided by him. They are a just leader, a youngster who grew up in the masjid, who grew up in the worship of Allah. Number 3, a person whose heart is attached to the masjids. Number 4, 2 people who love each other for the sake of Allah. They meet for the love of Allah and part ways for the love of Allah. Number 5, a person whom a woman of nobility and beauty tried to seduce. Then he adds, I certainly fear Allah. Number 6, a person who gives charity and conceals his charity to such an extent that even his left hand does not know what his right hand spent. And number 7, a person who engages in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in solitude while his eyes shed tears. Number 5, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with such a youngster. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is reported to have said, verily Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala becomes pleased with a youngster who isn't inclined towards these sins and futilities in which other youngsters are involving themselves. A pious youth's attention is to be focused towards doing righteous deeds and staying in the company of the righteous and pious. Such a youth ought to grow up in the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma narrates that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, verily Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves the youngster who utilizes his youth in the obedience of Allah. Yazid bin Maysara says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O youngster who has forsaken his desires for my sake and who has spent his youth for me, you are like some of my angels. Number 6, the death of martyrdom. Abdullah bin Abbas radiallahu anhuma reports that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, whoever falls in love, remains chaste, conceals this from others and then passes away, he passes away as a martyr. Note, this hadith is in no way promoting haram or illicit relationships, rather it demands chastity when one becomes infatuated after an accidental gaze. Number 7, Jannah. Yahya bin Ayyub Khuza'i narrates that he heard from someone that there lived a youngster during the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, who was fervently devoted to worship in the masjid. Umar radiallahu anhu was very impressed with him. The youngster had a very old father and would visit his father every day after performing the Isha Salah. However, his road passed by the door of a woman who used to flaunt her charms by the roadside because she had become infatuated with him. As he passed by one night, she made persistent effort to seduce him until he eventually followed her. As she entered through her door and he was about to do the same, he remembered Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The evil intention vanished instantly, and following the verse of the following verse of the Holy Quran came to his tongue. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ اتَّقَوْا إِذَا مَسَّهُمْ طَائِفٌ مِّنَ الشَّيْطَانِ تَذَكَّرُوا فَإِذَا هُمْ مُبْصِرُونَ. Indeed, when the temptation from shaitan reaches those who fear Allah, they remember Allah and their eyes instantly open and they realize shaitan's plot and ignore the temptation. The youngster immediately fell unconscious. The woman then called for her servant and with her help, the two of them carried him to his door. He was made to sit and his father's door was knocked. When his father came out to look for him, he found him unconscious in the doorway. He summoned some of his family members and they together carried him inside the house. When the youngster regained consciousness and after a considerable part of the night had passed, his father asked, "Dear son, how are you?" "I am well," came the reply. When his father then asked him in the name of Allah what had happened, he informed his father about the incident. "Dear son," the father asked, "what was the verse you recited?" When the youngster recited the verse he had recited at the time, he again fell unconscious. Although the people tried to revive him, this time he had passed away. It was still night when they bathed him, shrouded him and buried him. It was only the following morning that the people informed Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu about it. Umar radiallahu anhu immediately went to console the father. "Why did you not inform me of the funeral?" Umar radiallahu anhu inquired. "O Amir al-Mu'mineen," the father replied, "it happened during the night and we did not wish to disturb you." Umar radiallahu anhu then told them to accompany him to the grave, and when they arrived there, Umar radiallahu anhu addressed the youngster by his name and recited the verse, وَلِمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ جَنَّتَانِ. The one who fears standing in the presence of his Rabb on the day of Qiyamah shall have 2 gardens of Jannah. The youngster responded twice from within the grave saying, "O Umar, my Rabb has already given me both these gardens in Jannah." Another narration states that the youngster said, "Dear uncle, go to Umar, convey my salams to him and ask him what the reward will be for the person who fears standing before his Rabb." The end of this narration states that Umar radiallahu anh went to the youngster's grave and said, "You shall have 2 gardens in Jannah, you shall have 2 gardens in Jannah." Number 8. Connection with the true beloved, the greatest of all gifts. Sheikh Sadi rahmatullah alayhi explains that despite love's apparent glamour, it is in reality nothing but hallucinations and fantasies. The real and genuine tranquility of the heart lies only in attaching it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and turning the gaze away from the attractive creation. After mentioning this, Maulana Shah Hakim Muhammad Akhtar Sahib states, the author in his humble opinion claims that the entire universe is constantly undergoing change. If the whole universe undergoes transformation, it is natural that its components and particles will undergo the same process. Thus, the changing and perishing of beautiful objects, which are the components of this ever-changing universe, is an undeniable fact of reality. When even sins and transgressions destroy the pleasure of this transitory existence, then it is indeed foolish to grant preference to this fleeting and transient dream over the eternally everlasting life of the hereafter. Anyone obsessed with the ambition to make himself a pleasurable object for life has sold himself into the bondage of a slave, and helpless slave in the yoke of another helpless slave of the flesh. Prostrate and submit all your desires before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then observe the pleasure and sweetness of ibadah. He who forsakes his materialistic desires for the spiritual pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala becomes a means of guidance for others to find the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the nur for his shattered soul. While walking in the public place, if the gaze is directed to a strange woman, the nur of the heart is extinguished and the soul becomes unsettled and restless. If there is a woman or lad living in the vicinity and the possibility of committing a major sin is highly probable, and such person is facing mortal danger, he should immediately leave the vicinity or else lead a life of extreme precaution and abstinence. Some people that were affected by this malady requested the author for some remedy. I directed them to dhikrullah and prohibited them from meeting or seeing their loved ones. Hardly a few days had elapsed when they returned and expressed their appreciation for the advice. The proper cure for this malady is redirecting the heart towards the real beloved one, Allah. This is achieved by abundance of dhikr and the companionship of the true lovers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning the awliyaullah. The person who discards his personal desires for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure is generally considered by the ignorant masses as a person leading a very austere, restricted and deprived existence. Yet he alone knows what pleasure Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala pours into the depths of his heart. When a person suffering from love sickness repents in front of a true wali of Allah, a true friend of Allah, and traverses the path of true love, he will quickly reach his destination. Everyday experiences indicate that those whose hearts are easily moved and affected by beauty, when directed in the correct avenue, become extremely valuable and precious. When the soul is leaving the body, it matters not whether it is sapped away in a gutter or on a king's throne. The only differentiating factor is whether the heart is attached to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or not. Chapter 2, Nearly 40.
Modesty and spirit.
Inshallah.
Okay, bye. तैयारी कर लो जोहर नमाज की. Okay.